Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary friends, to another episode of Vigorously with your girl, Val Kleinhands. Music Monday edition, because it's a Monday episode. It's coming out on a Monday. The biggest thing that everybody is talking about in music right now is our Spotify Wraps. Everybody is royally obsessed, and rightfully so, with who got what listening age, who got what top artist, all this, like what songs were played, what albums were our favorites. We are literally obsessed. So what we're gonna do is do a deep dive into Spotify Wrapped 2025. How was it received? What did mine look like? I'll share that with y'all. All the above. We're gonna do a deep dive into 2025 Spotify Wrapped today because we were obsessed. We were actually counting down. I mean, I was anyway. I was counting down just to get mentally prepared. Last year, kind of a dud, right? Universally, we were disappointed because we felt like the accuracy was off and we just felt like it didn't do as much of a deep dive into our listening habits as the previous years. You know, it didn't give us as much information in 2024. So we had some expectations in 2025. And for my part, I am going to say that they were met. However, I know not all of you felt that way. So we're going to get into that as well. First, let's start with my results. Top artists. In order. I'll share with you in order. I'm wearing my top artist of the year. Typo, negative. For any of y'all that don't know. Now you know. Second, Opeth for me, Mastodon, Aerosmith, Pantera. I mean, for me, it was when I compare that list to what I got in 2024, I think the only spots traded were Opeth and Typo Negative. I'm a pretty consistent listener, and that tracks with my eating habits as well because I'm a pretty plain eater and I tend to order the same things all the time. But I don't know what that says about me, but there was not a lot of variation in my top artists this year. Top songs, in case you were wondering. Now, this is where we get a little bit more eclectic, which I think is a little bit of a better reflection of my actual listening habits. Time, Hootie and the Blowfish was my top song this year. We Were Electrocutes, Typo Negative, second. Third, Stranded, Gojira. Gojira had a huge year in 2024, and I guess I was still riding that high. Cloud Connected, In Flames, saw that performed live earlier this year, so perhaps I was mentally preparing for the amazingness that was going to be In Flames in front of my face. She Burned Me Down, Typo Negative. I mean, Typo for me is one of those bands that is consistent. You know what you're going to get. It's probably, I tend to appreciate that structure in life. So that's probably why I gravitate toward them as a band. I've heard that is Peter Steele's personality type as well. May he rest in peace. So maybe that's why the branding, the music, all of the above was as consistent as it is. I hope, we'll nerd out about Typo Negative just for a little bit because we're on the subject. Johnny and Kenny. Okay, if you're a fan, you know those names, but if you don't, that's former guitarist and former drummer. I'm saying former because history lesson. When Peter Steele, their lead singer and arguably creative powerhouse, Peter Steele, when he passed away in 2010, they didn't do anything since then. And in my opinion, rightfully so. I think that it was Peter's baby. He was the creative brains behind it, sonically, branding, color palettes, all the above, the vibe, the mood. It died with Peter as it should have. So there hasn't been anything new necessarily musically in the Typo Negative world since then. Now, there is some chatter with the remaining living members who are Kenny Hickey, Johnny Kelly. Josh Silver is alive too. He was the keyboardist, but he prefers to live a private life, so we'll respect that. But Kenny and Johnny are the ones that are out doing the interviews. They're the ones that are still in public. They're the ones that are still doing interviews publicly, still doing their own projects, respectively. they're the ones that are still out and about. So anybody that wants to hold on to typo negative tends to go to them. That's your frame of reference. That's the vibe. Everybody has been begging Kenny and Johnny in any interview I've ever watched with them within the past, not just year, but years previous. They want to know, what are we going to do for a tribute for typo negative? What's going to happen? Well, the truth is, and this is from their own mouth, I'm paraphrasing, so understand that, but their explanation is that while the singing can be recreated, and I mean note for note, a baritone could likely come close to what Peter has done vocally. The challenge is finding a bass player that can play bass the way Peter did. I am not a musician, so I cannot dive further into the dynamics of all that, but because I don't understand them. But what I can tell you is, in layman's terms, Kenny and Johnny don't feel like they have found somebody who can play bass the way that Peter used to, because it was so unique. And that is kind of what's holding up any type of tribute show to him, any type of new record, any hope of reformation, etc., etc., etc. That is the roadblock that they continually run into. That's the latest on that. So if believe me, if something happens, I will chat about it and we will nerd out together. Moving on to back to today's order of business, the Spotify Wrapped 2025, my results. Top albums in order, I will give you those. Wayfarer, American Gothic. Now, I was really excited about this band. This is not a new album by any means. It's new-ish. It's a few years old. But to me, it's a fresh sound. To me, this is black metal done the American way, particularly when you involve the American West. And if you're listening from outside the US, just to kind of paint a picture for you, the West is unique unto itself. Every region in the US kind of has things that make them unique and make them their own, so to speak. The West is one of those regions, and Wayfarer does an incredible job of honoring that history when it comes to the American West and kind of putting a Western perspective on their outlooks on life that they're writing about. They're writing about cattle driving. They're writing about cattle thieves. They're writing about owning a ranch and the horrors that can come with it sometimes, and how dangerous the job can be sometimes. Of course, they recite the old stories, Cattle Kate, the legends that, like, if you're a kid in the Midwest and maybe your dad was watching Westerns, or, you get a brief tutorial in a history class on the Manifest Destiny and westward expansion after the Louisiana Purchase, that kind of thing. You start to hear little legends and stories like that of just Billy the Kid and outlaws, and Wayfarer does an incredible job of painting the black metal version of that, the American Western way. So it's new, it's fresh, and it's interesting to me because I am not someone that grew up in the American West. I grew up in the American Eastern section, we'll call it. I would call where I grew up the Rust Belt, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That, to me, if you're not aware, that is an industry heavy area. That is an area known for coal and steel, and it had been for decades before both industries respectively died, and many people were unemployed, and many people in that area struggle today because a lot of what their economies were founded on no longer exist. So they had to shift, and they had to find different ways of living, different ways of getting by. I mean, that can be a whole episode unto itself, so I won't go any further. But I'm trying to paint a picture in that the West is new to me because I didn't grow up there. I didn't live it. So that's why I find what Wayfarer writes about interesting. You could almost argue that it is a country unto itself because our landmass is so big. I live in Minnesota now, and that's a little bit more Western. So I'm kind of hearing a little bit more of those stories, interactions with natives, that kind of thing. Like I didn't hear about that when I lived in Pittsburgh. I started to hear about it more frequently when I moved to Minnesota. So it's just interesting. And Little House on the Prairie and all that, like, I live it. The Laurel Ingalls Wilder Highway is 2 miles from my home. I'm not joking. So maybe not even. It's a completely different perspective, and I appreciate it. Lorna Shore was a top album this year for me, specifically Pain Remains. That's the album. Number 2 for me, according to Spotify Wrapped 2025. Opeth's Blackwater Park. I mean, one of my favorites. I love Watershed as well. And I love Heritage, and I'll say that too. But as far as what actually made the top 5, Opeth's Blackwater Park made number 3. Blood Incantation, big year for them. Absolute Elsewhere. I've got that on rotation at number 4. That was my 4th top album this year. And of course, I was definitely dissecting the new Opeth album, for lack of a better term. It's a year old now, but new to my ears. Last Will and Testament, Opeth, that came in at number 5 on my 2025 top albums, Spotify Wrapped results. Listening age. This was fun. And this is like what you're texting your friends about and what you're like sharing online too. 53. I got 53. And you know what? Given the majority of what I listen to, stuff from early 2000s all the way up to the late 60s is kind of like where I live, usually, most commonly. That's kind of where the bulk of my listening is. I will give new music a chance. You guys know that, but that's kind of where I live, so to speak. So 53, if I had to average it, I felt like that was pretty accurate. Minutes listened. I listened to 20,343 minutes of music this year, and my goal is going to be to exceed that for 2026 because I freaking love music and I need it to be more part of my life. If you love something, do that too. My top genre, a shock to no one, was heavy metal. However, pop rap and pop rock and hard rock were also in there. I didn't jot down the order for you, but all of them were part of our top 5. Not in order, but they were part of the top 5. I found that interesting. Just chatting about what I thought about my own results, I thought the listening age was funny. And like I said, definitely accurate. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll break it down. This was a feature that Spotify introduced in their 2025 wrap this year, where your age is estimated based on your listening habits and when, most of your streamed tracks were released. Literally the year. So they're kind of taking all of that into consideration. If I had Purple Rain on rotation, that's going to put me at 1984, and that is going to impact my age when you compare it to 2025, for example. That's kind of what Spotify explained that their breakdown was. So considering that explanation, like I said, I feel like mine was pretty close to accurate. I would probably live somewhere in that area with my variation. Now, this is a question that I wanted to ask myself because I saw a lot of people again this year challenging the accuracy of their own results. So how did I determine whether or not I felt this was accurate for me? My own perception, duh. And of course, asking my loved ones and people that are actually close to me personally to verify and confirm. Husband confirmed, best friends confirmed, brother confirmed, etc., etc. Like anybody that is a music nerd or knows my music listening habits, I double checked that with them. I cross-checked that with them. And they agreed that my results were accurate, especially my husband, because he's the one that actually sees what I'm playing around the house. So he would know. If they agreed, I felt that those were accurate results, and that's kind of why I went that route, just to get my own gauge. Overall, accurate for the most part is what I thought. What I did question, though, and we'll get to this because I think a lot of you had the same question. I questioned the inclusion of updates to my playlist and their impact. And what I mean is, I just felt like the newer additions to my playlist did not weigh as equally or as heavily as something that had been played more consistently and had a little bit more longevity. I feel like those habits had more pull, so to speak, when it comes to how the results came together. So, I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't know that Spotify has come out and said that that's what they have done explicitly, but that was just my theory because I started to go on a listening journey this year that included a lot of my former favorites as a kid. You know, I put NSYNC back on the playlist. I put the Backstreet Boys back on the playlist, and Brandy and Monica and, you know, just Tony Braxton, all the above, just like anything that Cameron, Jay-Z, like, you know, anything 90s, early 2000s. I was like, I miss listening to these things on a regular basis. I'm going to put them back on my playlist. Well, I didn't see a whole lot of that reflected in my 2025 Spotify Wrapped results. So, let me check with me on that in 2026. We'll see if that changes, maybe. Ultimately, I kind of use this just as like a reference for what band shirts to buy too. I was like, oh, if my top artists are Typo Negative, Opeth, Blood Incantation, etc., then I need to have those band shirts, period. Which I do, thankfully. Sometimes I have too many of them. And sometimes that's when you need to go to Goodwill. Wrapped reception. Let's chat about the reception overall. And I'm including your thoughts in this too. I think what we liked collectively, and this is just what my own eyeballs on social media inferred. I think what we liked was the strong re-engagement and sharing that came with everything that was like customized for us to post in our stories and things like that. Spotify itself is saying that this was their biggest Wrapped year ever, with 200 million users engaged within the first 24 hours of release. I was one of those 200 million. My husband was, our friends were, like, but we're also big music fans. So take that with a grain of salt. But according to Spotify, this was their biggest year ever when it comes to Wrapped. Favorites came back with our Spotify Wrapped series too, like the fun moments, like the genre breakdowns and the top song play counts and top albums. All of that was a welcomed return because we were missing it in 2024. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. I think we appreciated the return of all of those things. I also kind of liked the retro design of anything that they made that was shareable, so to speak, like the content that they made that was shareable. It just had like a little bit of a retro and mixtape vibe, and I'm here for it. And I think you were here for it as well. Overall, there just seemed to be a consensus that more effort was put in this year. And we definitely think it was an improvement over 2024, but there's still some tweaks that we think need to be made. So let's get into what we didn't like. I don't think we liked the fact that the accuracy of these results were questionable. There's still some concern over the accuracy of it all. Why was this song part of the list and not this one that I remember playing on a loop, or you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Or even for podcasts that we're listening to or audiobooks. Same thing. Listening age. The subject itself is always a hot topic and it can get spicy. And it was a little bit questionable here. Like, obviously, our listening age was not always accurate, and that was for a variety of reasons. That comes down to the logistics of it that I explained earlier. So we didn't trust it as a whole just because we knew that the listening age was not accurate. I don't think it helped garner trust or transparency or accuracy. So the lack of accuracy there, that called the authenticity of the whole thing into question. And that reminded me that this is something that we care about. We care about the accuracy and authenticity of these results. And they may or may not, account for any changes that you have made to your playlist or listening habits mid-year. Like that's kind of what I called into question anyway. And I think some of you were calling into question as well. We're not sure how heavily any of that impacted the results. I question it. You question it. My perception is that, like I said, the consistency and the longevity were what impacted those results more. I felt like they held more weight. So anything added new, so to speak, unless you were obsessed, I don't think it was tallied the same way. And I think some of you felt that way too. Our conclusion, Spotify Wrapped, fun to share, cringe and all cringe results and all. The magic behind Wrapped really is how well it captures the accuracy of our listening habits and what we perceive our own reality to be as listeners. And I understand that that's a very hard job for Spotify to do, but there's a reason we're feeling that way. And a big part of how we receive Spotify Wrapped every year is definitely going to be how close to reality we perceive those results to be. So something to think about, something to share. Fun regardless. It's a fun thing. It's a fun communal activity that we all can share and chat about our results with. And I enjoyed it this year. I hope you enjoyed it this year as well. Next year, I'm going to try to exceed how many minutes I've actually listened. I'm going to try to crush at least 2,300 again. So have fun with that. Have fun with whatever goal you set yourself for yourself in 2026. And let me know how you're feeling about Spotify Wrapped too. I think there's more work to be done on it, but I'm happy that this particular year was an absolute improvement over what we saw in 2024. So hopefully that means good things for 2026. You can let me know what you think in the comments. As always, check it out. I'd love to chat about it further with you. If you want to know more of my results, I'm happy to share those with you as well. Share yours with me as well. Cringe and all. I love to see it. I love to nerd out about it. Have a fabulous week. We have another episode on the way on Wednesday, so you stay tuned for that. Bye.